Karen called 911 like I was building a pirate ship, all because I added a simple dock to my own lake cabin, claimed it violated HOA water rules. Well, she didn't know. I'm the one who issues state fishing permits in this region. The lake, the dock, the regulations, I know them better than anyone. So when the cops showed up, they didn't stop me. They asked if they could cast a line that there's a certain kind of silence you only find by the water. It doesn't hum like a city or stretch like a highway. It breathes. Light wind through pine trees, soft creaks of old boards on the porch, and the slow, natural rhythm of lake life. That's what I signed up for when I bought the cabin. Or maybe I should say, inherited. It was my uncle's before it was mine, and my grandfather's before that. A modest A-frame tucked into a notch of trees that overlooked a quiet, still cove on the east side of Silver Point Lake. It was never about luxury. No big dock, no jet skis, no over-designed landscaping. Just enough to cast a line, tie up a canoe, and sit by a fire when the sun dipped low. The cabin wasn't even visible from the road. That's the way I liked it, the way my family always did. The deed was old school, hand-signed with ink that had browned over time, but perfectly intact. It included shoreline rights, stretching a generous 50 feet into the water and 50 feet down the coast in either direction. That land, that water, wasn't some shared community space. It was private. It was mine. Now, here's what Karen and her clipboard crew never understood. I don't just own lakefront property. I work for the lake. I've been with the State Department of Natural Resources for over a decade. I help manage permit systems, from freshwater fishing licenses to conservation area access for a 5-county stretch. And yes, I'm one of the folks who not only signs off on regulations, but helps enforce them. That means I know exactly what constitutes a legal dock, what falls under repair and ownership, and what's a community's responsibility versus the individual's. That's not me bragging, it's context. Because what started as a peaceful retreat turned into something else entirely when an HOA started blooming nearby. And I mean blooming in the most invasive way possible. It started with the mailbox flyers. New neighborhood going in, just a few hundred feet down the gravel access road, on a raised bluff that overlooked the north end of the lake. Big vinyl signs boasting modern lakeside living and a natural way to gather. It was some developer's dream project. 25 homes with oversized decks, matching mailboxes, and HOA bylaws thicker than most people's wedding vows. At first, I didn't mind. They were across the bend and out of sight. Their little clubhouse was built up on higher land, with just enough tree buffer to muffle whatever suburban soundtrack they brought with them. I figured they'd handle their little rules, garbage placement, paint colors, lawn length, and leave the rest of us alone. And for a while they did. My days didn't change. I'd drive out to the cabin on long weekends or days off, sit on the back porch with a cup of black coffee and a clipboard of permit data, review dock registration forms, or process annual fishing stamps while watching a heron glide just inches above the lake surface. Sometimes I'd invite a buddy over to help sand the old canoe, or we'd smoke a couple of trout in the fire pit. It was simple, sacred. The lake was never busy. Most of the public access was at the opposite end, and mine was one of the only private docks on this particular bend. That's why, when the old support beams finally gave out, I decided to build a new one, small, legal, and structurally sound. A few treated beams, some composite decking, and proper clearance per DNR code. I followed every regulation I've enforced myself over the years. No shortcuts, no excess, just a clean private dock. The construction didn't even take long. I brought in a contractor I'd worked with on state shoreline projects, someone who knew what they were doing, and more importantly, knew what not to do. We built it in under a week, staying within the setbacks, using floating sections to avoid disturbing the shoreline base. When it was done, it looked like it had always been there. Nothing fancy, just a simple T-shape with a cleat for the canoe and a bench for sitting. I thought that would be the end of it. But then came the drone. It buzzed by on a Saturday. I was sitting on the dock with a sandwich and a cold drink, reviewing angler reports on my tablet, when I heard the distinct whir of a recreational drone overhead. It hovered, tilted, hovered again, then zipped back toward the HOA development. I didn't think much of it. Annoying? Sure. but not uncommon. These days, half the kids in those neighborhoods fly them like kites. Still, it felt deliberate. Later that evening, I found a note pinned to my front door. No envelope, just a printed page with the Whisper Bend HOA logo stamped at the top. To whom it may concern, our office has received reports of unauthorized dock construction along the eastern lakeshore. Please be advised that modifications to shared waterfront property are not permitted without prior approval from the HOA Environmental Oversight Committee. Non-compliant structures are subject to fines and removal. It wasn't signed, but I knew exactly who sent it. Karen. She wasn't on my deed. She wasn't my neighbor. She didn't even live close enough to see the dock without a zoom lens. But that didn't stop her from acting like she ran the lake. At first, I thought she was just confused. Maybe someone told her my cabin was part of the new development's lot plan. Maybe she thought the lake had been fully zoned for HOA oversight. Either way, I figured a conversation would clear things up, so I sent her a letter of my own. Polite, professional, straightforward. I included a copy of my deed, the shoreline map, and the section of state code confirming private lakefront rights. I explained that my dock had been constructed within regulation and on private land, not part of her HOA jurisdiction. I never heard back, but I did see another drone. And then the cops showed up. Karen's first note didn't get her the reaction she wanted. No groveling apology. No dock removal. No desperate request for forgiveness from the almighty HOA president. What she got instead was a professionally worded letter attached to a scanned deed and a reference to state water access laws. And silence. Beautiful, satisfying silence. I thought that would be the end of it, that she'd back off after realizing she had no jurisdiction, no claim, no authority. I was wrong. A week later, a new envelope showed up. This time it was certified. She was getting serious, or at least she thought she was. The letterhead was the same, Whisper Bend HOA, this time with a compliance citation form printed beneath it. The language tried hard to sound official. You are hereby notified that your property has been reported in violation of Section 4.3b of the Community Water Use and Shoreline Modification Guidelines. The nonsense continued for 2 pages. It accused me of unauthorized construction, disturbance of communal water views, and visual obstruction of the lakeside harmony. My dock, on my private land, was apparently interfering with the visual rhythm of Karen's HOA dreamscape. She even threatened fines, $100 per day until the dock was removed. And in fine print, a threat that repeat offenses may be escalated to county enforcement. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. I replied again, still politely. I reminded her that I was not, and had never been, under the jurisdiction of her HOA. I included again my deed, my shoreline rights, even a snapshot of the DNR permit guidelines I help write. I told her that any further attempts to harass, threaten, or falsify authority would be met with formal legal response. I figured that would scare her off. But Karen doesn't do retreat. She does escalation. A few days later, I noticed the mailman looked uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eye when he dropped a new package at the end of the driveway. Inside, another certified letter, this one more aggressive. It was from the HOA's Legal Affairs Committee, which, as far as I could tell, was just Karen and a printer. It stated that I had failed to comply with multiple citations and that they would take the matter to the appropriate enforcement bodies. I rolled my eyes. There were no citations. There was no legal standing. There wasn't even a shared boundary line. She had no more power over my shoreline than a seagull did. But she didn't care about facts. She cared about control. And when control failed, she called 911. I was outside raking leaves when the sheriff's SUV pulled up. 2 deputies stepped out. Calm, professional, but cautious, the way they always are when called to a land dispute. One looked at the clipboard, the other at me. Are you the owner here, sir? I am. We got a call about unauthorized shoreline modifications, possibly a violation of zoning or state lake access guidelines. I blinked. Then I laughed. I couldn't help it. I issue those guidelines, I said, still holding my rake. And that dock is built exactly to code, on deeded land I've owned for 15 years. They exchange a look. I have paperwork if you'd like to see it. Yeah, that'd be helpful. I walked them into the cabin and handed over the binder. It had everything: my property map, deed, water rights, and copies of the shoreline usage permits. I even had photos from construction showing compliance at every step. As they flipped through it, another car pulled up. Karen. She stepped out with a clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, like she was ready to direct a SWAT raid. "I want to make a formal complaint," she said to the deputies before they could say a word. "He's violating the lake's visual code and operating without HOA authorization." One of the deputies held up a hand, gently. "Ma'am, we're already reviewing the property documents. Everything appears to be in order." She blinked, thrown off. "But the dock is on his property," the deputy said, "and he's not part of your HOA. But it affects our lake." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Is this your lake?" "Well, it's our view. Our community invested in." "Ma'am," the second deputy said, firm now, "he's not under your jurisdiction. He's in full compliance with state regulations and has all the documents to prove it." Karen's face turned beet red. She tried to speak again, but it came out more like a squawk than a sentence. She shifted tactics. "This is a neighborhood. We have standards. If he doesn't follow the rules, how do we protect the quality of the community?" One of the deputies looked at me, then back at her. "You don't," he said. "Not here. Not on his land." It was over. Well, almost. Karen stared at me like she'd swallowed a lemon. She said nothing, turned on her heel, and stormed back to her car. The officers apologized for the disturbance and left me with a copy of the incident report, just in case. But that wasn't the end. She may have lost the battle, but Karen wasn't done playing general. That night, I found a post on a neighborhood Facebook group, screenshots forwarded to me by a sympathetic neighbor who wasn't buying Karen's act. The post accused me of environmental violations, destructive building, and even hinted that I was harboring invasive species by having a dock that might attract non-native wildlife. It was laughable, but it was dangerous too, because people like Karen count on chaos. When they can't win with law, they use noise, social pressure, lies, online spin. So I stopped being polite. I called my supervisor at the state office. I filed a formal report. I drafted a complaint to the county recorder's office citing ongoing harassment, false HOA citations, and misrepresentation of jurisdiction. Karen thought she could run me off with a phone call and a Facebook post. She forgot that some of us don't just follow the rules, we write them. The best part about the truth is it doesn't need volume. It just needs paperwork. After the deputies left and Karen stormed off like she'd just been dethroned, I took a breath. I hadn't raised my voice once. I didn't have to. When you're standing on land with your name on the deed and a state-issued badge in your pocket, the noise around you starts to fade into something quieter, something powerless. But I wasn't done. Because Karen hadn't just embarrassed herself in front of the local sheriff, she'd crossed a line. Several, actually. False reporting, harassment, jurisdictional overreach, and a little cherry on top, impersonating regulatory control she didn't have. So I did what I do best. I started filing. First, I documented everything. I scanned the threatening letters from the HOA, the screenshots of her Facebook rant about environmental violations, and the video footage from my outdoor cameras, including her standing in the road during the police visit, yelling at uniformed deputies. Then I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and filed 3 reports. To my supervisor at the Department of Natural Resources, letting him know that an HOA president had attempted to assert lake policy over non-HOA property while calling the police on a state-certified officer. To the County Zoning and Code Enforcement Office, attaching maps, records, and complaints about HOA boundary overreach, misuse of private land claims, and fabricated citations. To the HOA itself, a formal complaint of personal harassment, property interference, and attempted impersonation of legal authority. And because I know how these people operate, I copied every letter to my personal attorney. Karen had tried to throw a book of rules at me. She forgot that I write the index. The next day, I took a drive down to the local government annex. It's a sleepy little building tucked behind the county library. White siding, green trim, with more dust than people inside. I walked into the clerk's office and requested a certified property map. The woman at the desk looked it up and printed a copy. Clear as day, bold black lines. My land. My shoreline. Not under HOA jurisdiction. Then I stopped by the DNR regional field office. I've been working remotely lately, but I figured a quick face-to-face would help the paper trail land stronger. I spoke with my supervisor, handed over the complaint, and explained what happened. He didn't laugh, but he did shake his head with that exhausted smile only civil servants have when dealing with overconfident residents. You handled it by the book, he asked. Every step. Good. Want me to have legal send a letter? Already did, but it wouldn't hurt to have it on letterhead. He nodded. I'll have it notarized. Now, here's where it gets better. That afternoon, I pulled up the state wildlife permit database, the one I help maintain. Not to retaliate, but to clarify. Sure enough, there it was, Karen, active fishing permit, registered under the HOA mailing address, set to expire in 6 months. I didn't do anything to it. Didn't need to. But I made sure the DNR's outreach and compliance officer was informed that one of our permit holders had recently tried to illegally regulate public wildlife access while violating shoreline boundaries. It wasn't personal. It was policy. And if there's one thing you learn in my line of work, it's this. You don't need revenge when the law does math better than emotion ever will. 3 days passed. Then the email started. First came a message from someone on the HOA board. Not Karen, but a soft-spoken guy named Mitchell. He apologized, unofficially, for any miscommunication or unintended escalation. He asked if I would be willing to attend a boundary clarification meeting at the community hall. I declined. I sent them the documents again instead. Then came an envelope from the HOA's insurance rep. Their legal advisor had apparently reviewed the matter and determined that no further action would be taken regarding your dock. The letter was phrased to make it sound like they were generously allowing it to exist. I sent back a sticky note that read, "Appreciate your input, but I don't need your permission to stand on my own land." The best part? I hadn't said a word to Karen directly. Not a call. Not a message. Not even a head nod when I saw her pacing on the far side of the lake with her little clipboard in hand. She knew. She felt the walls close in, slowly, legally, and with total composure. Neighbors started whispering. A few even reached out privately, thanking me for standing my ground. Turns out, Karen had been bluffing her authority for years, telling folks they had to register kayaks, warning kids not to fish too close to her protected reeds, even writing up tickets for minor landscaping changes. But no one ever challenged her. Until now. And now, the board was spooked. The sheriff's office was informed. And the DNR? They issued a warning letter, gently reminding Karen that future misuse of authority or violation of permit rules could result in administrative review or revocation. She must have read it 3 times, because the next week, I saw something I never thought I'd witness. Karen, sitting by the lake, fishing pole in hand, looking over her shoulder like someone waiting to be caught. No clipboard. No clipboard at all. IT didn't take long for word to spread. At first, it was whispers, the kind that swirl just beneath the surface of a tightly wound community. A neighbor casually asking another, "Did you hear about that whole dock thing?" Or, "Wait, she called the cops on the guy who owns the shoreline?" Harmless curiosity at first. But the more people learned, the faster the illusion began to crack. Karen had spent years spinning a web of soft tyranny. Most residents didn't question it. After all, who wants to start a neighborhood war over where to place a kayak or which direction a flag faces? But this time, her reach had exceeded her grasp. And worse for her, it had crossed into a realm where facts, not opinions, ruled. Land deeds, state permits, legal boundaries, jurisdictional rights. This wasn't just a bad call. It was exposure. The first public spark came from a homeowner named Jenna. She posted on the HOA's private message board. "Can someone please clarify if we actually have jurisdiction over that eastern lakeside property? I heard it's not part of the HOA at all, and the dock incident was a misunderstanding, or worse." That post got 14 comments in under an hour. A few people defended Karen at first, but then someone uploaded a map. A real one. County stamped, with a red boundary that very clearly cut short of the protagonist's shoreline lot. Then someone else chimed in. "Wait, I thought Karen said kayaks had to be registered with the HOA before going out on the water?" "Same. She told me we couldn't fish past the floating markers without a permit from her office. She has an office? It turned fast. By the end of the day, a dozen residents had come forward sharing similar stories. Odd warnings, made-up rules, even threats of fines for disturbing aquatic balance or non-compliant shoreline visibility. One couple said she warned them their toddler splash pool could result in neighborhood water violations. Another said she knocked on their door with laminated quiet hour charts she claimed were from the state. They weren't. But the most damning part? Several residents discovered their fishing licenses were issued by the state, not the HOA, despite Karen telling them otherwise. In fact, some were under the impression they needed HOA approval to use the lake at all. And all of it was unraveling. The HOA board tried to contain it. They issued a brief public statement. We want to clarify that recent events regarding shoreline access were due to a misunderstanding of boundary jurisdiction. The board recognizes that protagonist's name, S property, is not under HOA governance. We apologize for any confusion and confirm that HOA policy applies only within officially designated lots. Enforcement roles will be reassigned accordingly. Reassigned was polite code for Karen just lost her power. She was removed from the enforcement committee and all compliance oversight. No more citations. No more unannounced visits. No more lake lectures. Karen, the queen of made-up bylaws, had been dethroned. Quietly. Publicly. Entirely. I didn't celebrate. Not outwardly, at least. The beauty of watching justice roll out in paperwork and quiet resignation is that it doesn't need cheering. It just needs patience. The next time I saw Karen, she was walking her dog on the far side of the road, eyes down, face neutral. No clipboard. No stopping to chat. She didn't even glance toward the dock, which, by the way, had never looked better. A neighbor named Robert, a soft-spoken guy I'd only waved to a few times, pulled in my drive later that week with a six-pack of lemonade and a quiet chuckle. I didn't know you work for the state, he said. I don't usually bring it up. Well, thanks for keeping her in check. I shrugged. I just stood on my land. That's all. He grinned. Yeah, but you stood pretty damn tall while you did it. More neighbors followed. Some offered apologies. Some offered company. And one even asked if I'd consider speaking at the next HOA open forum, not as a member, but as someone who could help clarify lake policy. I declined politely. I didn't need a podium. The dock, the paperwork, and the silent dismantling of Karen's reign, that was enough. Still, I gave him a packet, printed lake law, public access rights, shoreline ownership clauses. Clear, honest, non-negotiable. The HOA board posted it in their next newsletter under the title, Understanding Our Boundaries. Funny how one phone call, one poorly chosen 911 complaint, revealed so much more than just a lie about a dock. It revealed who really held power, who knew the rules, and who'd been hiding behind laminated noise all along. The lake has always been quiet. That's why I chose it. Not for the view, not for the property value, but for the stillness, the way the water seemed to mirror your mood when you needed it most. And after all the noise, all the threats and letters and police visits, it finally returned to that again, silence. But this time, the silence came with something better. Respect. Karen, once the voice behind every bogus HOA citation and rule, had become background. She was no longer feared or followed, just tolerated. You'd see her walking her dog alone, not stopping to chat, not passing out flyers, not even offering passive-aggressive comments about community standards. She'd been quietly pushed to the edge of the very community she tried to dominate. Nobody was rude, but nobody listened anymore either. Meanwhile, my dock stood stronger than ever. I reinforced the framing, added slip-resistant planks, and put in a few subtle upgrades, solar lighting, a bench at the end, and a discreet waterproof box with laminated guides. Inside the box, notices about shoreline ownership laws, rules for conservation compliance, QR codes that linked to official DNR documents, the same ones I helped write. It wasn't a power play. It was education. A neighbor's kid came by once with a fishing rod and his dad close behind. I saw them reading the sign together, pointing at the fish species list and laughing. The kid waved shyly. I waved back. Nobody argued anymore. Nobody asked if it was legal. They knew. Then, a few weeks later, I got a call from a former colleague at the DNR. "Hey," she said, "heard about your little dock drama." I laughed. "It's been eventful." "Well, we got a shoreline management workshop coming up. Small thing, just a dozen or so landowners and waterway council folks. You want to speak on it?" I paused, not because I was unsure, but because for the first time in weeks, I realized I didn't feel bitter about any of it. Not Karen, not the HOA, not even the call to 911. Because when the dust cleared, what was left was better than what I had before. A dock, a deed, and a lake that now came with undisputed boundaries. I said yes. That Saturday morning, I stood in front of a modest group at the County Nature Center. I didn't give a big speech. I just told them the truth. How a dock sparked a showdown. How someone who didn't understand the law tried to rewrite it with nothing but noise. And how all it took to push back was calm, quiet ownership, backed by paperwork, patience, and a little bit of steel in your spine. People nodded, took notes. One of them said, "Wish we had someone like you in our neighborhood." I smiled. You don't need someone like me. You just need to know what's yours and not let anyone shout you off it. Back at the lake, peace finally stuck. No more letters. No more late-night complaints. Just neighbors who waved, respected the lines, and sometimes even asked questions, real ones, not accusations. The dock stayed quiet most days, except for when I sat on it with a rod and a thermos and watched the sun dance on the water. It felt earned, not just reclaimed, but reinforced like the dock itself. That if someone calls the cops because they think your dock looks illegal, remind them, the law isn't about how things look. It's about what's written. And if you're the one writing the rules, they might just be the ones swimming upstream. Karen thought authority was about presence, about noise, about how many bolded phrases she could fit into a fake citation, and how loud she could talk over people who knew better. She thought if she said something with enough force, it would become true, that shouting illegal could turn a dock into a criminal offense, or that a clipboard had more power than a deed. But paper beats volume every time, especially when that paper has signatures, seals, and statutes backing it. I didn't have to fight dirty. I didn't have to scream. I just had to stand on my dock, calmly hand over my credentials, and let the facts dismantle the fiction. In the end, Karen's reign didn't fall because of some dramatic confrontation. It fell because the people around her realized what she was doing and what she wasn't allowed to do. Her control relied on ignorance. Once that was gone, so was her authority. So if someone tries to turn your peace into their playground, don't panic. Just check the law, know your line, and stand on your dock proudly.